Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Canast. I'm the Director of Strategic Support at the National Deaf Center. I'm a white woman wearing glasses. I have long blonde hair, and I'm wearing a short sleeve green blouse today. I'm very excited to be here for the webinar, Exploring Access and Instructional Strategies for Deaf English Language Learners. This webinar is in partnership with LINKS, Literacy, Information, and Communication Systems. NDC and LINKS, L-I-N-C-S, has seen questions come in from stakeholders regarding how to best instruct deaf English language learners. So we're excited this day to have three very knowledgeable presenters who will talk about that. And our hope is that you will leave with some new strategies and changes you can make to improve educating deaf English learners on your campus. Real quickly, the National Deaf Center is a federally funded center through the Department of Education under the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP. Our mission is to disseminate information, provide networking and resources and strategies to help improve support for deaf students in continuing their education or training opportunities. The structure for today's webinar will be as follows. We will invite the three panelist presenters soon. They will be presenting on two different portions, and I want to jog my memory by looking at my notes. Deaf students and language acquisition. And then the second part will be access and instructional plans. So during the webinar, you can use the Q&A feature. You'll notice that Q&A button at the bottom of your window. Anytime a question pops up, or if you have a technical issue that you want to ask a question about, use the Q&A feature. We will gather your questions, and at the end of this session, we'll try our best to answer your questions. If we do not answer it during this webinar, please send us an email. We also have been given permission by the presenters to share their personal emails where you can reach out directly to them to ask questions. Toward the end of the session, we will offer to you a quick survey we'll ask you to fill out before we head into the Q&A portion. With that, I want to go ahead and get started. I would like to invite our three presenters. All right, there's Helen, wonderful. Thank you, all three of you, for being here today. We're excited to have you and for this opportunity for you to share your knowledge with our audience, to share strategies and how they can best support deaf English learners. So if you don't mind, take a quick moment to introduce yourself and your current role and how that role applies to the webinar today. This is Tanya. I'll get started. I am Tanya Strimlau, and I teach at Gallaudet University in the English department, a variety of levels, but writing is my specialty. I'm a white woman with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. I'm wearing glasses and a wine-colored long sleeve shirt, and I have a white background. This is Laura. Wonderful. Thank you. Next. Gemma, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gemma Gabor, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am Asian with a short hair, and I'm wearing glasses with a black top and gray sweater. So my role, actually, I work at Gallaudet University, same with Tanya, and I am with the English Language Institute I teach English as a second language, and at the same time, I'm also the program coordinator.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gemma. All right, Helen.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here and to be a part of this webinar. My name is Helen HK. I am a white woman with a long blonde hair and I wear glasses. I'm also wearing a blue shirt with long sleeves. My pronouns are she and her, hers. I am a coordinator of applied linguistics and TESOL, teaching English to users of other languages at Central Connecticut State University. Where I'm also an associate professor of applied linguistics, I should say.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your backgrounds with us. And thank you again to all three of you for being here to share your expertise and knowledge. We're looking forward to that and seeing how we can improve the work that we do with deaf students. Now, I don't want to run out of time. We have a lot to cover in the time remaining. So let's start your discussion related to deaf people and language acquisition. I'm going to turn off my camera and hand it over to you all to enter into your discussion together. All right, this is Tanya. No one's wanting to start, right? It's tough. I would say, just to begin with, deaf English learners are different and the same as hearing English learners. When we talk about English is the L2 of many deaf students, that's fine. But as for their L1, many of their families do not sign. They've experienced language deprivation, and that changes how they then acquire language. So that's something I want to open up with. Gemma or Helen?
Yes, I would like to agree with Tanya with deaf and hard of hearing English learners as a diverse population. The deaf really have unique factors or characteristics that may affect learning, and which includes their cultural background, their linguistic background, the existence of concomitant disabling conditions like linguistic, social, personality, and cognitive developmental issues. We also have the term deaf plus, meaning deaf who are not individuals who are not only deaf, but they are also they're also having learning disability, they are autistic, or even have Usher syndrome. Usher syndrome, if you don't know, is a rare genetic disease that affects both hearing and vision. Other factors that can also affect, I've already mentioned the hearing loss, the degree and the type, could be the age of onset, the age at amplification, and the type of amplification, like the hearing aid, the cochlear implant. And there's also the presence and timing of early intervention and the level of support from the family. At the same time, the method or mode of communication, like total communication or American Sign Language, or even the oral.
Let me jump on this, if that's all right. To add to what both Gemma and Tonya had said, most deaf people, to my knowledge, come to post-secondary education with complicated language histories from everything you have just heard and seen. some of it has to do with deprivation of natural linguistic input, but other things have to do with concomitant health disorders, perhaps. This is also true for many multilingual learners who are hearing that also sort of go unidentified. But this is much more complicated often for deaf learners because good assessments are currently non-existent, right? And so what this means is that a lot of times what we know about how to teach English or ASL or anything else for that matter to deaf individuals is literally not here. We don't have yet as much as we would like to know about what it means to teach correctly, right? And so simply because of that history, it's not so easy to come up with quick strategies, right? So that's the first thing that must be said, I think, based on what we know about the people's language histories. Does anybody want to pick it up? It looks like Tanya wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, you know, this is Tanya. I would say some deaf students do arrive to college with excellent English skills. Often, though, those are children who have deaf parents, who have been exposed to language from birth, who attend a school that has a special education in both English and ASL, so that they have full access to language and to the education that they're receiving, and that aids in their development. Also, when we look at English, we think about hearing English language, spoken language, and there aren't a lot of deaf models for language. You know, it depends on who their teachers are. Often it's a hearing teacher. And how is it that these students are going to learn to write well if it's not modeled to them, especially by other deaf adults? So that's another factor that complicates things.
Jim, were you trying to say something? I don't want to interrupt.
Okay. I would like to add, I would like to agree with Tanya that is the reason why actually Gallaudet here, we are bilingual, ASL and English. So our mode of the instruction is direct ASL. So like for me, I teach using ASL. We don't have any interpreters, but if we have interpreters, it's because our student has another complication like Usher syndrome. So they need an interpreter much closer to that individual. But all in all, yes, we've been using ASL in class. And it is really very important for deaf students to have somebody to look up to, like a deaf role model.
So to agree with what I hear my colleagues say, community of learners, community of language users is very important. We know this from other multilingual literature, from literature on heritage language users as well, and hearing and deaf. We also know that many students, well, both hearing and deaf, really are not so lucky to have bilingual instruction, right? And so I work in the state where I am a member of a board of the American School for the Deaf that practices bilingual instruction at the K-12. But at my university, we don't have bilingual instruction because this is a hearing school, and we have deaf students attending it, and they have to have an interpreter in English as a second language class, because there are deaf students who are actually foreign deaf students, right? They're from Saudi Arabia, they're from Guatemala, and they may or may not have strong ASL skills, and certainly our instructors don't have ASL skills to teach directly. So this takes us back to the point that Tanya brought up, which is, what is the role of the teacher and what is the role of the interpreter? Can the interpreter be the sole input provider? Can the teacher be the sole input provider? And the answer, I think, really is no, right? I mean, the student has to do two things. They have to learn a language, and they have to learn like a writing system, and they have to figure out how to work with the interpreter as well. So what that means, I think, is the set of sort of cognitive demands on such an individual is just sort of multiplying as the day goes by. This suggests that the institution needs to start planning ahead, right, for how it would meet such requirements, including if there is a English program or a course that works with multilinguals more generally, how it actually structures such instruction so that the interpreter does not become the sole input provider.
I agree that we really have to understand the background of the learners so that the interpreters and even the teachers will be able to know how to approach their instruction.
I'd add something. It's ideal if the interpreter and teacher could work together, because for me, the college experience, there were some interpreters that were not that good in my experience, and the person at my university who hired interpreters, they did not know ASL. So they weren't a great judge of that person as in terms of their qualifications. Now, I was fortunate I came with really good English skills, but I also didn't know my rates as a student in terms of how to deal with a bad interpreter. I had to learn along the way. I had to go to the person and say, hey, this interpreter wasn't good, wasn't a good fit for this class or for me. And so now students have this need for self-advocacy, but that's still a piece.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think not only do we need to ensure that we train students starting a little bit before they hit post-secondary, but also from the administrative perspective, right? From the administrative perspective, we need to ensure that the programs are set up in such a way that there is some sort of an interpreter networking oversight. Right, so it's not just that the Office of Accessibility Services sort of just calls and requests an interpreter and trusts that the interpreter will do the job, and right, like there is a collaborative relationship between instructors and interpreters in the institution and the content providers, so that if there is such a situation that the interpreter needs to become part of the instructional team, right, that is possible to create, right? And so that may mean that some extra funding should be allocated, that the Office of Accessibility Services should get ahead of this before the first deaf student walks in the door, right? Like, this is kind of the pre-planning that should start happening. I understand that interpreter shortage is a complex situation in various states, including mine, but these kind of plans would be good to set up. Because this is one of the foregoing strategies that helps everybody win.
I think with regard to the interpreters, I think it would also be helpful if they will attend, if you're familiar with the TESOL conventions, so that they will have an idea as to how English language acquisition, second language acquisition is taught, So by attending this kind of convention, there are different presentations actually for that. So I think that will give them an idea also.
I see that Laura's trying to cut us off, but let me just add one final piece here, which I think is super crucial and hopefully will pop up in the rest of the discussion, which is anybody who is working with a deaf student needs to be educated in what it means to know second language acquisition methodologies, right? This is true for an instructor. This is true for an interpreter. And if you don't have that, then create a professional development opportunity for people to attend that. I mean, that's the reality of things.
This is Laura here. I do appreciate that last comment that you made, Helen, because we had planned to say, we want to hear more about what should disability services disability services professionals and professors and teachers know as they are attempting to design curriculum or simply take an instructional approach or strategy with deaf English learners. What are some strategies? Tanya had just mentioned, just putting any interpreter in the hot seat without any type of background can be wrong at best. It can set that student up for failure. It's definitely not the best situation. So help us recognize what it is we should be thinking about as we have a deaf student taking one of our courses. We have another minute to discuss that, and then we'll talk about, you can also wrap up any discussion about language acquisition that might help any professionals here in our audience who don't have that background. So again, thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add about the deaf English language learners. They rely heavily on visual cues, such as sign language, even facial expressions and body language, in order to comprehend the language they are learning. So it's not only like they just have to look at the interpreter as is, it's also important for the interpreters to really have that facial expressions and that body language.
So I want to give Tanya a chance to speak, but I, of course, go ahead. Do you want to say something? I don't want to keep.
No,
Okay.
go ahead, and then I'll speak after you, Helen.
Okay. So from my standpoint, no multilingual person, especially who has had complicated history of language learning. Many multilinguals have complicated history of language learning. That includes many hearing people who have had traumatic experiences entering dominant language, including English, right? And none of these folks are able to easily exist in an English-only environment. And so all day long, I talk in my classes about what we need to be doing to ensure that students succeed. So the first thing to do is to assess where the content is versus where the language is. And if the language is not quite where you want the language to be, then language has to be taught, pure and simple, right? Create courses, find courses, enter into partnership with an institution that teaches a course explicitly and enroll the students in such courses. There's no easy fix, right? Students come in with L2, L3, L5, many different types of histories. They come in from Guatemala, they come in from Costa Rica, they come in from Japan, with multiple sign languages, with several spoken languages. We know nothing about linguistic histories of many of our students. We only know that we expect them to handle English-only content material with instructors who are not prepared to teach in a pedagogically sound manner, in a pedagogically supportive manner. It's not the instructor's fault. They're not taught to do that. So what that also means is that an Office for Student Accessibility should be pushing universal design, professional development for faculty, right? Like this is the other thing, right? It's systematic and it's systemic, but that improves the lives of all, including deaf learners, right? In some sense, deaf learners are very much similar to other multilingual learners who come from minoritized contexts into a system that actively considers their language not to be sort of valid for content. And so what we have to do is we have to think of ways to bring that to the forefront. That's the first thing to do, in my opinion.
This is Tanya speaking. When we look at our students, we have to realize the time it takes for language acquisition. There is no quick fix. We typically only have that student for a semester. That's a few months, or depending on if you have a quarterly system, it could be 8 weeks or just a shorter number of months. And language acquisition takes much longer than that. I personally like to give my students, well, let me back up. I want to recognize that the students know some English. I mean, some arrive at Gallaudet know English, but most of the time, if they're in an English classroom, they have something. We're not starting from zero. They have some English language knowledge. So I will give students a very short reading assignment in their mother tongue. So if a student, for example, is here from China and they're in my class, I will have them read a story so that they're able to see themselves in that story. I will have CODAs read a story about, having deaf parents so that they're able to see themselves in that story. So even if my students who come into my class, their parents, their mother, for example, may have enough knowledge of English to be able to understand a basic story, but it's kind of my goal, and allow the interpreter to catch up with the thought here. I want them to be able to leave my class being able to tell their own mother a story in English in a way that maybe they could understand. We also need to understand that they're going to make mistakes in learning English, and they need to be willing to make mistakes. And I make sure that my students know that.
I think, I just sit here with my program director hat. I keep my program director hat on my head. And I want to ask, when people talk to me about literacy difficulties, right? I ask them, what is the problem exactly? What is it that you are finding problematic? Because there are different ways of interpreting the term literacy, right? So is it really sort of reading and writing? Is it orthography? Because today, all the research suggests that literacy is really not about putting written words on the page or lifting them off the page. That's not actually kind of the definition of literacy. The definition of literacy is exactly what Tanya said, right? Which is taking a story and being able to kind of do a story back, tell a story, retell a story, express things do things with vocabulary, infer, and use all these global as well as local characteristics of any given language. Now, there will be some errors and there will be some mistakes, but those take time to clean up. And I have a PhD and 2 master's degrees, and I still make mistakes in English, right? What are you going to do, right? This is what happens. But nobody's judging my English over that. But that takes time to clean up, right? The question is not whether we're zooming in on the tiny errors, right? The question is what is developing. And reality is that instructors, post-secondary instructors, like college instructors, often don't know that this is what they should be looking at, right? And then they should not be overlooking certain tiny things. They have to ignore them, because otherwise they will just be bogged down by stuff that will eventually disappear. It just takes practice to clean them up. Takes revision, takes learning how to edit. Somebody has to teach you how to edit. These are the things that have to be learned together in groups, in tutoring sessions, when you are part of a cohort, part of a community. And if you're alone and isolated, it will be that much harder.
This is Tanya. Go ahead, Gemma. Go ahead. I feel like it's your turn at this point. Okay. when students make errors with their writing, with their reading comprehension, when I see what it is they're expressing in writing, we often will see patterns. If ASL is their first language, I'll give you an example. There are many, but we all know ASL and English are different. English is a written language, and so often deaf students can be misunderstood. Verbs are shown in a different way in ASL as opposed to English. In English, we add a verb and a time, a tense to everything to show past or present or future. And that's it. You don't have to keep saying yesterday because you've worked it into the verb tense, right? So I will often see students show something like, this happened yesterday, but then they'll go back to writing without that tense. And the reason is they are thinking their thought in ASL. Another issue we see are pronouns, she or he, and understanding why we use those different pronouns. Like they may intend to say his mother and they use the female pronoun her. Well, because in ASL, those pronouns don't have gender. So it makes a lot of sense that that is a confusing point for them. And there's a long list of examples just like that.
I agree with you, Tanya. And if I'm faced with that sort of ASL writing, I will just sign it for me to be able to understand it. And then eventually just give a feedback to the student. Going back to the second language acquisition, I also would like to point out the second language acquisition by Jim Cummins. For those of you who are not aware of BICS and CALP, BICS is known as Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills, and CALP is the Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. So BICS is actually the baseline ability used for everyday communication, while CALP is the level required to understand and use complex academic concepts. So with this, I think it will be wise to come up with a language profile of the students so that you will be able to really assess if the student is still under the category of BICS or is already ready for an academic or English sessions. So basically the BICS, it will take like 3 years. And for CALP to be proficient, it takes 5 to 7 years. So that's one thing that educators, even the service providers like interpreters will have to understand, because sometimes maybe they think that they already failed with the way they teach, but or the way they interpret, but actually the individual deaf or hard of hearing is still in the level of BICS. So understanding where their language profile is will really also help the service providers and the educators on how to instruct them.
And I think this is crucial, right? I mean, this is true for the discussions we have had, we, at a larger sense, sort of bilingual educators, L2 instructors at a larger scene, both sort of in the US and sort of my state, but also in the world, right? Both when we talk about teaching L2 learners who arrive to the US, but also bilingual learners who are heritage speakers or signers of their first languages, right? So what is it, it sounds like they know Spanish. It must be the case that they are proficient in Spanish, right? So, oh, it's perfect, they're bilingual. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Just because they're able to have a conversation at the dinner table with their grandparents does not mean they can handle college curriculum, right? It just does not mean that, right? So how do you properly assess? How do you properly teach? How do you properly set up curriculum in such a way that you support academic skills that also include these curricula, include potential transfer between the languages, right? Given what you had, Tonya, brought up, that languages coexist in the mind of a bilingual. Yes, there is ASL or any other sign language for that matter, if the learner comes with them. Yes, there's sign languages, and yes, there's emerging written languages, spoken languages, right? And they all coexist. They're all simultaneously available to the learner. And therefore, the expectation is that they will always want to come out on the page. That is what research says. It is an increased cognitive load on a multilingual to try and suppress them. We know this from now decades of literature on all kinds of language combinations. What does that mean? That means that we cannot expect a signer not to use ASL when they're writing in English or in Japanese or in Mandarin. Like, we can't expect that to happen, right? And so recognizing, listen, I see that this is ASL. I see that this is English. I see that they're interacting. This is what, like, here's the comparison case. Here's how we move to the next level. Here's what you should or should not be doing. Here's, right, like, all of this must be a part and parcel of language instruction. I don't know if I have stressed this enough yet, but language instruction.
You can visit our website, nationaldeafcenter.org, for a wealth of resources, online courses you can take. They're self-paced courses and modules. We have articles. We have a news page. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter and subscribe to that and stay up to date with us as far as announcements, new releases, new resources by visiting our website. Everything we offer is free, absolutely no cost to you. So I want to thank the interpreters for being here today to allow us to facilitate this discussion, and for the NDC team working behind the scenes. I hope you enjoyed this webinar and look forward to the next one. Thank you everyone for coming today. Have a great rest of your day.